quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's nice to see the presiding officer in the chair, and I know because he's a student of history, it will come as no surprise to my colleague from Colorado that this week marks the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. In 1947, Europe was in ruins. After years of war, factories from Manchester to Munich had been bombed out. Railroads lay disfigured from artillery. Farms stood defaced by the tracks of 1,000 tanks. Across the continent, Europe's once humming economies stood silent. Over 60 million people had died, including 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. Here in the United States, we mourn for the loss of over 400,000 of our soldiers. We had spent, in today's dollars, nearly $4 trillion to secure that victory in World War II. But to secure the peace, our leaders understood that even more was required of us. Truman's Secretary of State, George Marshall, told the nation that without a return to normal economic health in the world, there could be no assured peace. In other words, if famine and poverty remained unchecked across Europe, unanswered, fascism and communism would soon follow, threatening United States interests and global stability at the same time. So after years of sacrifice that this generation of Americans, thank goodness, have never had to endure, the easy course would have been to withdraw behind the Atlantic and the Pacific, to turn our back on the world and embrace isolation. But instead, we proposed the Marshall Plan, a bold investment to revive Europe's economies, to modernize industry and expand trade, not only for allies like France and Britain, but also for our enemies, Germany and Italy. It was extraordinary that political leaders here once made those decisions. I struggle to think of a time in human history when the victor helped to revive the vanquished with no strings attached, no colonial objective. As the Marshall Plan made its way through Congress, leaders in Washington made the case to the American people, even standing firm against some who wanted to require European countries to buy only American products with the aid that we gave them. Still, in the years to come, American farmers and manufacturers would fill millions of crates of wheat and wood, of sugar and steel to rebuild Europe from the ravages of war. President Truman understood that in time, strong European economies would become strong trading partners, strong military allies, and a bulwark of freedom against Soviet expansion. History proved him right, to say the least. After the Marshall Plan, Western Europe surged back to life as Eastern Europe stagnated behind the Iron Curtain. In the West, production rose and hunger fell. Foes became friends. Bonds across the Atlantic solidified. Investments through the Marshall Plan helped lay the foundation for NATO, the common market, the European Union. Few actions in our foreign policy have been as consequential for America's long-term interests, for our national interests, and all at a cost of $150 billion in today's dollars, 25 times less than the total cost of World War II, and about 25 times less than what we paid in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. As President Truman invested in Europe's recovery, he also helped fashion a new world order from the rubble of war. American leadership forged global institutions to enshrine our interests and values around the world for generations, giving rise to the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, and the entire international system that we have today. 70 years ago, President Truman had the vision to think longer term. He had the wisdom to see that what was good for others was often good for us as well. And he had the courage to ask our citizens to lead, to sacrifice, and to believe that even after the second war in a generation, it was still within their power to shape a lasting peace. Those actions, those qualities are why Truman's presidency marks one of the finest periods in American foreign policy, in the history of our foreign policy. And the comparison with what we're seeing today just couldn't be starker. Mr. President, under the banner of putting America first, President Trump has undermined our interests at nearly every turn. At a time when China proposes to spend over $1 trillion to expand its global influence, with new railroads from Hungary to Kenya, new bridges and tunnels linking Southeast Asia together, and new electrical plants to power Pakistan, President Trump proposes to slash our foreign assistance, advancing U.S. interests around the world. At a time when NATO faces challenges to its east and south, President Trump publicly rebukes the alliance and refuses to reinforce its bedrock principle of collective security. As the recent terrorist attack unfolded in London, President Trump took to Twitter to promote his political agenda and sow fear in the wake of that attack. In the face of challenges like extremism and instability that demand 40-year strategies like the ones President Truman had in mind, President Trump is conducting his foreign policy 140 characters at a time. And now, as the world unites to confront the perils of climate change, our president withdrew from the landmark Paris Agreement that we helped forge in a shameful abdication of America's global leadership. In doing so, the president ignored the voices of millions of Americans and thousands of businesses urging him against the arguments that he made to stay in the agreement for climate reasons and for economic reasons and for national security reasons as well. By withdrawing from it, the president has turned his back on millions of people across the globe as well, mostly poor, who are already on the edge of crisis, who may face droughts, displacement, and famine from a warming planet. America has a strong interest in avoiding that future. Anybody who has seen what's happened since the Arab Spring understands what resulted from a doubling of the price of wheat in Egypt. A wise leader could see that. A President Truman would see that. Like the Marshall Plan, the Paris Agreement recognized that in the modern world, there is no over there anymore. Today, over there is here. And here is over there. And our president just fundamentally doesn't understand it. He claimed that withdrawing from the Paris Agreement would, quote, put America first. In fact, this move threatens to put America last in innovation, last in clean energy, last in science, last in our moral responsibility to hand the next generation a safe and stable planet. That is why states and cities all across the country are making their own commitments to honor the Paris Agreement. Now it's just us, Nicaragua, and Syria on the other side. And that's why towns and Cities and states all across the country are scrambling to fill the void of leadership left by the administration, to show the rest of the world that we're serious too. In my home state of Colorado, we know that we can protect our economy and our climate, that we can grow our economy and protect our climate. We see those as linked together. You can't do one without the other. We developed the first state limits on methane pollution. We passed the first voter-led renewable energy standard in the entire nation. We established our own limits on carbon pollution. And in the process, we've created 13,000 renewable energy jobs, with wind jobs alone expected to triple by 2020. On average, Mr. President, those jobs pay an average salary of $50,000. We're manufacturing again in our state with the supply chain that comes along with it. And what's come with those common sense regulations? One of the strongest economies in America, the lowest unemployment rate in America. And we see this all across the country. New energy jobs growing 12 times faster than the overall economy. The president doesn't see any of that. In a matter of months, from foreign assistance to global alliances to terrorism and climate change, the administration has imperiled America's stature with a short-sighted and willfully ignorant agenda that's profoundly out of step with the realities of the world and the interests of the people of the United States. In a recent op-ed, senior officials from the administration painted the world as no more than a, quote, arena where nations compete for advantage. They were trying to explain the president's behavior while he was in Europe. That attitude marks a huge departure from generations of American foreign policy. This is not about the Obama administration. This is about a set of traditional American values and approach to the world that we've had almost since the nation's founding. And the space that the president is creating out there in the world by abandoning those treasured American values gives space to those who seek every single day to undermine the liberal world order that has allowed our countries and allies across the globe to succeed. And the president should understand what generations of leaders in the United States have put America first. They've always put America first, not in slogans or in stump speeches, but in the alliances and institutions that we built, in the values that we champion, the alliances that we forged that have given our world 70 years of peace and prosperity. That's a legacy upon which we must build, one that has put America first and kept America first today, and if we act wisely, I think, for decades to come. Mr. President, I yield the floor.